The plague that forced people to dance to death. Imagine this. It's the middle of a hot summer in 1518. A woman walks into a street in the city of Strasbourg and for no apparent reason starts to dance. There's no music, there's no celebration, and for weeks she just can't stop. Soon, hundreds more join her in a bizarre and horrifying dance marathon. This is the very real story of the dancing plague, a hysterical mystery that saw up to 400 people seemingly dance against their will, and whose true cause is still debated over 500 years later.
It all kicked off in mid-July of 1518 in Strasbourg, which was then part of the Holy Roman Empire. To put it mildly, life there was brutal. A series of terrible famines had left the poor starving, while diseases like smallpox and syphilis were running rampant. The people were living under a cloud of constant misery and superstition, the perfect storm for something truly strange to happen. And it all started with one woman. Her name was Frau Trophäa. On July 14th, she stepped out of her half-timbered house and simply began to dance on the cobblestones. But this wasn't a performance. It looked more like a convulsion. Her body jerked, her arms flailed, and she moved with a desperate, frenzied energy. There was no music, just the sound of her feet hitting the stone. Her husband begged her to stop, but she was completely lost to the world, seemingly unable to control her own body. She danced for hours, collapsing from exhaustion only when night fell. But after just a few hours of sleep, she'd get up and start all over again. This went on for nearly a week. She danced until her feet were swollen and bleeding, driven by some invisible force. The citizens of Strasbourg just watched, their confusion quickly turning to fear. They had no idea this was only the beginning. Within a week, what began with one woman's silent, frantic dance would explode into an epidemic of madness that would grip the entire city.
One by one, others began to join Frau Trophäa. At first, it was just a few neighbors, but soon, dozens of people were caught in the same compulsive fit. By the end of the week, over 30 people were dancing. By August, that number had swelled to a staggering 400. Men, women, and even children were swept up in the mania, dancing day and night in the sweltering summer heat. What witnesses saw was a living nightmare. These people weren't dancing for joy. They were in agony. Many screamed for help, their faces twisted in pain and fear as their bodies betrayed them. Their arms thrashed, their bodies convulsed, and their eyes were glassy and vacant. They kept going long past the point of injury, their clothes soaked with sweat and their feet bloody and raw. The city authorities, completely panicked, consulted local physicians. Ruling out anything supernatural, the doctors came to a disastrous conclusion based on the era's medical knowledge. The plague was a natural disease caused by, quote, hot blood, end quote. And their prescription? Even more dancing. The logic, as flawed as it was that the dancers needed to literally sweat the fever out. So the city council took action. They cleared out guild halls and the grain market, creating makeshift dance floors. They even built a large wooden stage in the public square and hired professional musicians to play pipes and drums, hoping it would keep the afflicted moving. This decision was a catastrophe. Instead of curing anyone, the music and the spectacle seemed to make things worse, spreading the hysteria like wildfire among onlookers. The nonstop music just fed the frenzy, pulling more and more people into the horrifying dance. The city's attempt to help had only deepened the nightmare. As the epidemic stretched from July into August and early September, the grim consequences of the city's failed cure became unavoidable. The human body isn't made for non-stop motion, and the dancers began to collapse from sheer exhaustion, strokes, and heart attacks. While official city records from the time don't mention a death toll, some later chroniclers claimed that at the plague's peak, as many as 15 people were dying each day. Realizing their plan had backfired spectacularly, the panicked authorities switched gears. They banned all public dancing and music. Having failed with a medical solution, they turned to a spiritual one. The belief grew that this was a curse sent by Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers, who was known to punish sinners by forcing them into an uncontrollable jig. The cure was no longer more dancing, but penance. The remaining dancers were gathered up, put on wagons, and taken to a mountaintop shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus. In a desperate ritual, priests put red shoes on their feet, sprinkled them with holy water, and had them pray for forgiveness while circling an effigy of the saint. And then, just as mysteriously as it had begun, the dancing started to fade. By early September, the last of the dancers had stopped. The horrifying epidemic that had gripped Strasbourg for over a month was finally over. The streets fell silent, but one question haunted everyone. What on earth had just happened?
More than 5 centuries later, we're still asking that question. The dancing plague of 1518 has never been solved, but we have some compelling theories. Suspect number 1 is ergot poisoning. Ergot is a mold that grows on damp rye, a key ingredient for bread back then. This fungus produces a chemical that's a precursor to LSD, and eating it can cause convulsions, muscle spasms, and hallucinations. This condition, known as St. Anthony's fire, was a known medieval problem. But there are some major holes in this theory. Historians point out that while ergot causes spasms, it also restricts blood flow, which would make the coordinated, sustained dancing seen in Strasbourg physically impossible. This leads us to the most widely accepted theory today: mass psychogenic illness, better known as mass hysteria. This is a phenomenon where extreme psychological stress manifests as physical symptoms that spread through a group. And the people of Strasbourg were living in a pressure cooker of suffering, facing famine, disease, and constant superstitious fear. The historian John Waller argues this created a stress-induced psychosis on a massive scale. Crucially, people already believed that St. Vitus could curse them to dance against their will. For people at their psychological breaking point, the belief that they could be cursed to dance might have been enough to trigger a trance where they did just that. A less common theory suggests the dancers were part of a heretical cult, performing a ritual to protest the church or attract divine favor. But there's little direct evidence for this, and eyewitness accounts describe the dancers as unwilling victims crying out in pain, not as willing participants. The physician Paracelsus, who visited Strasbourg a few years later, had his own take. He reportedly dismissed the saintly curse, blaming hot blood, but also bizarrely suggested that Frau Trophäa had started dancing just to annoy her husband, and that other women joined in out of a lewd and impertinent desire for mischief. While that sounds absurdly misogynist today, he was one of the first to suggest the cause was in the dancers' minds, not in the heavens.
In the end, we're left with a chilling historical puzzle. Was it a mind-altering poison? A psychological breakdown born from unimaginable suffering? Or something else we don't yet understand? The dancing plague of 1518 is a haunting reminder of the bizarre ways the human mind can react to extreme stress and how fear itself can become a contagion. The story of Frau Trophäa and the hundreds who followed her into a dance of agony is a strange and unsettling chapter in our history, where the line between mind and body completely blurred. What do you think really happened in Strasbourg? Was it poison, panic, or something else entirely? Let me know your theories in the comments. And if you enjoyed this look into one of history's weirdest events, make sure you like and subscribe for more explorations of the unknown. Thanks for watching.